Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie Affinito, your KidLit loving host, inviting you back to another bookish conversation with a children's literature author. Today, I'm talking with Devin Elle Kurtz. Devin's the author and illustrator of her debut picture book, The Bakery Dragon, a book that will take you on a magical journey with Ember, a tiny dragon with a heart of gold and a taste for treats. And while this might be her first book, she's no stranger to the book cover and animation world, and we'll talk about all of that today and more. So let's jump into today's episode. Devin, welcome to KidLit Love. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I mentioned before we pressed record, and I've said it multiple times on this podcast, but there is just a special kind of energy when it is a debut book. And I can feel it. They can't see us, but we both have big grins from ear to ear. So excited to talk about this book today.
Well, I think I told you, but this is also the first interview that I've done about the book. So a lot of firsts going on. Very
Yes,
exciting.
I love it. I'm honored. I'm so excited to be the one to kick off the Bakery Dragons launch into the podcast world. So let's get started with some introductions because this is your debut picture book, which means you may be unfamiliar to many listeners, at least as of this moment. So let's give them the backstory. You've got a lot of creative projects under your belt, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about you, a little bit about your work, and how you got here in your first picture book in the KidLit world.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've worn a lot of hats in my life already. I've worked in a lot of industries. I think, from the beginning, from the time I was a kid, I have been storytelling focused. So I'm happy to do storytelling in any form that it takes. I worked in the animation industry, and everything we do in the animation industry is in service of storytelling. I've worked in games, both video games and also like tabletop role-playing games. And that is also in service of story. And I've also worked in books. I've worked in books as an illustrator for books and a cover artist for books. And now I'm getting the chance to tell my own story as a picture book author, which I feel like really brings everything full circle for me. Because I loved picture books from the time I was a little kid. And that was one of the first, forms of storytelling that I was introduced to. I loved picture books. I loved graphic novels. I loved illustrated middle grade novels. I just devoured it. Anything that had illustrations in it, even just the illustrations on the cover, it inspired me so much. So getting the chance to kind of loop back to the very first thing that ever made me want to be a storyteller is so cool.
Oh,
But I worked in the animation industry on the TV show Disenchantment for 4 years as a background artist and then the lead background artist. And then I've also done a bunch of book covers.
so one of my favorites that I did not know was your cover was The First State of Being by Aaron and
Yes.
Greta Kelly.
Oh my gosh, I loved working on this cover. I love that book, to begin with. I think it's such a cool book. It is one of those manuscripts where I usually sit down to read the first couple chapters, and I ended up just reading the entire book that night. Yeah, that book is so cool because it's about time travel, and it's we wanted the cover to show a reflective quality and like thinking about meditating on the past and the present and the future. And what I ended up coming up with for that cover was that we see the three main characters in the book. We don't actually see their real physical forms, but we just see a reflection of them in puddles on the sidewalk. And a major scene in that book takes place right after a rainstorm. And there's some interesting stuff that happens with whose reflection you can see versus their feet up above versus who you only see as a reflection, which I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil the story,
No
but
spoilers.
it was really fun. That is one of the covers that I feel like I've been able to put on my like thinking cap for most and think about like how I can tell the whole story of the book in a single image as much as possible. That one was really fun. And Erin is such a cool author to work with. I think her work is so fantastic.
Oh, it is. It is. The other one that I loved was The Teller of Small Fortunes.
Oh
That was
my gosh.
and that cover's beautiful. I thought, "Oh my goodness, that was Devin."
Yes, yes, that one was me too. I that one was also so cool because I like we really just wanted to capture like cozy vibes, but also like this combination between like epic fantasy and also cozy, like meeting right in the middle there in like such a fun and interesting way. I loved like pushing the style a little bit more. That was the first cover I ever worked on for a non-kids book. I typically work on, middle grade and YA covers, like children's covers. So getting to work on an adult fiction cover for the first time was really cool. And Katie Anderson, who was the AD on that project, was so helpful and so wonderful. And I feel like she just pulled me right into that like adult fiction world and helped me grasp, what that looks like by comparison to children's fiction.
Well, everyone always says you can't judge a book by its cover, but my goodness, the cover is a really important aspect of the book when it catches your eye on the bookshelf or if you're in the bookstore. And, I love on your website, you have your collection of covers all there. You have the cover with the title and without the title, so you really can get the full effect. And it is something to just scroll through it. I'm literally doing it right now as we are recording this because of the way that you use your colors, kind of the color schemes, that magical piece of it. Your books make me want to judge the book by its cover because they really are gorgeous. They really, really are.
Thank you so much. I think doing book covers has been so cool because it really gives me a chance to think deeply about what a book cover says about the story and what book illustrations in general like add to a story and how you can add in this new storytelling element because it does really it like adds a layer to
Yeah.
what happens in the book. And I know myself when I think about a book I often think about the cover and what the cover is saying about the story like becomes really integral to how I view the story. And I think that's been really helpful in my own books. Like now when I go in to design a book cover for a book that I'm authoring, it's really interesting to be able to view it from both sides simultaneously, like the book cover artist and also the author side.
I was just going to ask you, how different is that of illustrating the cover for someone else versus your own? That must be quite the shift.
It's really interesting when when I'm illustrating the cover for somebody else. I often have like so many different ideas, and I'm just like throwing them all out. Like we do like a whole bunch of different roughs first, where I'll just send a sheet over with like 3 to 5 different composition options, just to like kind of figure out like what's sticking, what's not, and they'll change a lot over that process. But with my own books, I often like I will get like set on one idea and I need to follow that through pretty far to then figure out is this going to work or is it not going to work? And sometimes it doesn't. And it's like a book that I'm working on right now. Like we had to try 2 or 3 different times to land on something that I think works really well. But it's a different thought process because when I'm working on somebody else's book, like I don't know the way they want their story presented. So I'm giving them a bunch of different ideas of like, well, if I were you, here are 5 different ways I might want it presented. And I'm trying to like put myself in a different version of what the author would want each time. But as the author myself I do know what I want, which makes me a more challenging
Yeah.
client. Like
I was
I'm
just
a
gonna
pretty
say
challenging
you're
client for myself because I know exactly what I want. And sometimes my ability as a cover artist doesn't, it fluctuates in its ability to match up to the vibe that I want in my head.
yeah, yeah, you're your own worst customer, your own worst critic there going back and forth.
Exactly.
Well, I do wanna talk about the cover of The Bakery Dragon. I wanna talk about a lot of things related to the illustration, but first, we need to tell them a little bit about the bakery dragon. I want them to see
Course.
it, kind of get a picture in their mind. And first, I want to talk about the inspiration behind it because the the inception of this book, if you will, the inspiration behind it, it started with an Instagram post, right?
It did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you have to
yeah.
talk about that. Tell us about that.
I would love to. So, in Instagram in 2020 and 2021, I started doing this series of illustrations where I would depict dragons and other fantasy creatures, but in like modern day settings, or like something closer to a modern day setting. So I painted dragons in all sorts of different places. Like I painted a library dragon where there's a dragon on a big pile of books, and there's a girl coming down the stairs to pay late fees, but with like a big box of shining gold because that's what a dragon would want. Um, I did an arcade dragon where there's a dragon sitting on top of a huge pile of arcade toys, and there's a little girl with a sack, and she's creeping along to rob the arcade dragon, but it's got its little eye open and it's watching her. So I have this whole series that I was working on of dragons in different modern settings. And I did a piece one day, which wasn't actually it. This is what kind of led into the piece that was the inspiration for the cover of the book. But I painted a dragon visiting a baker who was offering up a big basket of bread. And the reason, like the little piece of inspiration that struck me is like, oh, a basket of bread would look just like a basket of gold from far away. So I think that if a baker was like walking along outside, a dragon, notorious, like, the whole idea of Western dragons love gold and they love their big pile of gold, they might spot that basket of bread and want to come down and check it out because it's nice and bright and golden. So that just like stuck in my head, and I couldn't stop thinking about a little dragon who was drawn to a bakery window because, at night it's so dark and cool and blue out, maybe it's rainy and misty, and from afar a bakery window filled with golden loaves of bread just looks just like a treasure trove that I think a little dragon would be drawn toward. So that led right into me drawing the piece that was the inspiration for the cover of the book, which is this little baby dragon in a rainstorm. The streets are filled with rain gushing out of the pipes and down the street. It's pouring, it's cool, it's misty, it's foggy, and then the little dragon is just like posted up in front of this glowing bakery window. It's golden and it's gazing up. And I wrote, I think the caption was something like, he just wants some bread. Like something along those lines. And I just thought it would be such a perfect like combination, like marrying of my love for fantasy and then also my love for baked goods and delicious fresh baked bread. And it ended up really resonating with people because I think there was something there beyond even just like the first layer of what you see, because it's like there's the layer of like, yes, this cute little baby dragon is like new to the world of looking for treasure and mistook, bread for gold. But then there's also this layer of, I posted it in 2021 in the beginning of the year when, everyone was inside and away from their families and away from their loved ones. And I think there's this feeling that really resonated strongly of like seeing something through like a window, but not being able to reach it. And like it's so close, it's like right there, but it's like just beyond your grasp that. Like the whole time I was working on it, I was like, man, I really felt like this little guy. Like there's like a real emotion there that I feel like is like begging to be explored more, because there is like this truth about being a person where so often like what we really want, like we can see it right there, but we just can't get to it.
Yeah, and it's that emotion that you so perfectly capture on that page. I think on the cover, on a couple of my favorite pages throughout the book. Your video, I don't know how many times I have watched that video of you kind of putting that scene together. I can't not look because it's just so cool to see, first of all, how someone can actually do that. This coming from someone who can only literally draw stick people. But I love seeing the progression of it, and you can feel the warmth. I was like, "You can feel the warmth of that bread. You can smell that bread." It's got this beautiful glow that just kind of comes off the page. I can see why people stopped the scroll, and saw on both a fun level, like you said, but also the deeper meaning that we'll talk about in the book, because I think there are both of those things in the book as well, right? The thing
Yeah,
that may
yeah,
draw
yeah.
you in, which is, oh, it's so cute. It's a little baby dragon and there's bread and we all love it. And then there are some much deeper themes to it. So
Yes.
I'd love for you, and you kind of already did this as you talked about your inspiration, but give listeners a little overview of the book to kind of set the stage so that we can dive a little bit deeper into some of those themes and kind of the ways you brought them to life.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so in the world of the bakery dragon, there's a little village nestled in the mountains, and there are a group of dragons who live in a cavern, a big cavern on the top of the mountain's peak. And those dragons terrorize the local village and steal all of their gold from them. So, like, they have these big piles of gold in their cavern, and they've got gold in everything. So they're a little indiscriminate in what they steal. So they steal gold coins, obviously, but also a golden toilet and golden chickens and golden cows and a golden spatula. So, anything gold colored, they're like, that's treasure. That's for me.
Yeah.
Um, and Ember is the littlest dragon. He's much smaller than the other guys. And he is no good at being a gold thief. He is a very lousy gold thief. He tries very hard, but his flame breath is very weak and very cute.
Yeah.
And he has no ability to scare the villagers into handing over their gold. So he feels a little bit out of place because he can't do what all the other dragons can do, and he doesn't have his own gold hoard. He doesn't have a pile of gold to guard, which is, the dragons what they're put on this planet for in their brains. So he wanders into the town, in a similar vein to what I was thinking when I was painting the original illustration. He sees that golden bakery window from up at the top of the hill and wanders toward it as the rain starts pouring down. And by the time he makes it to the bakery window and realizes he can't actually get inside, and it's just, it's there just out of reach, the beautiful golden bread, he's too tired, so he has to curl up and go to sleep in the rainstorm, which that spread in the book was also really directly inspired by, all that energy from the original Instagram video and the post that I made, that original painting. But then in the book, the story continues, and the baker, who is a kind woman who doesn't judge dragons as immediately as the other villagers, she throws open the door and says, "Well, you better get in here, or you're gonna be washed clear off the mountain because the rain's coming down real hard." And when he goes in, he ends up baking with her. She gets him to come out and try his hand at baking, and it turns out that his big clumsy dragon feet may not be good for stealing gold, but they are perfect for kneading bread. And together they start a new friendship and perhaps a new business venture.
Yes. Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. That was just such the perfect, you could tell you wrote the book. That was such a perfect progression without kind of revealing some cool things at the end. So listeners, I think now can get the idea that I was talking about with these multiple levels. There's the really fun part, which is it's cute dragon and he looks so adorable when he can't, breathe fire like the rest. And there's this gold and that there's one page in the beginning where you see the gold and the other gold things, which are just
Yes.
kind of go on a little Easter egg hunt through there. But then as the story progresses, you see those deeper themes. Ember just wants to belong, right? And he's just trying to
Yep.
find the way that will make him belong in the
Yep.
circle of dragons he is with. There's also themes about stereotypes against dragons, perhaps.
Yep.
There's themes of, there's kindness and, helping out a little dragon, where others wouldn't. And then at the end, because I won't spoil it, there's some wonderful themes of sharing and
Yes.
things coming together in a way that may not have been expected at the beginning of the book when people were running, screaming
Yes.
from the dragon. So I just love how you have both things because both are going to appeal to readers. They're going to be in this book. They're going to be leaning in. They're going to want to know what's happening to Ember. Then you have all of this other rich, rich information that can just bring some beautiful conversations, I think, between kids and parents and teachers who are reading it that is just, I think, what our world needs right now.
Oh, thank
Yes.
you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. When you, I'm curious because I know it started with a sketch and it progressed from there. How did you decide as an author? Like, how did you take that one little thumbnail that perhaps was in your mind and bring it to life in this story the way that you have? Like, what was that process like for you to shift from bringing an image to life to bringing a story to life?
That's such a great question. Yeah. I found that for me, I am such a visual person that it was so beneficial to me to do an illustration based, like a sketching based writing process where
Mm,
I write best when I am doing little doodles and sketches of what I want to see on the page while I'm writing. I have a really hard time just sitting down at a Google Doc and just plain writing for something like a picture book. I found that for me, what really ended up like, cracking the story open and helping me figure out what I wanted to see on the page was getting my sketchbook out and just drawing through it. And I did that 3 or 4 times and did it a little bit different each time over the course of a couple of weeks until I finally landed on, oh yeah, like this is the story, like this is Ember, this is his journey. And finally, when it all starts to come together, the feeling of it clicking for the first time, because this was my first picture book, my first fiction book. Like the only other book that I've written was a nonfiction book for adults. So it's a really, really different process. Um, Once it clicks for the first time, I mean, that was so energizing. And that gave me like this big burst of energy to go and, like rehash it over and over again and get it to the point of feeling like, all of the beats were happening in the right place and, what was the pacing like. And in between the initial rough outline of the story that I did with sketches, which was like a series of story beats. I went and did a mountain of picture book research because going through the process of writing a picture book and like realizing how much more complex it is than what it seems to be on the surface, it
yeah.
made me realize how much research I needed to do and how much I wanted to do. And I went and spent so many days just poring over picture books at the library, at the bookstore. I took a mountain of books home with me. I was looking at them, I was taking the dust jackets off. I was looking at, the inside cover, the front cover, the end pages, how long were they? Where does the title page fall? How frequently do the beats happen? How often is there a comedy beat? Like what sort of gags work on the page for each age group? What's the difference between a book for a 2 or 3 year old versus a 3 to 5 year old versus a 4 to 8 year old, because they're different and they have different ways of getting across the emotions, how direct you can be, how sarcastic you can be. It was so fun, and I gained such an appreciation for picture books. Like they've really become like one of my favorite art forms. They are so cool and you can do so much with them. I really think they're like one of the coolest types of books that are published in the American publishing industry. And I like they've added so much richness to my life. I'm so excited now when I see my favorite picture book author has another book coming out. Because they offer so much, not just for the kids but also for their parents and for anyone else who picks the book up. And so many of them do operate on multiple levels. And
Yes.
just like seeing that and seeing, how creative you can be with picture books, that gave me, the knowledge that I needed to go in and do that final pass of thumbnails, which I did. And that became essentially like the story as it is now. So it went through many iterations. And I think the winding path that it took like ended up being perfect for like my growth as, an artist and as an author as well.
It makes so much sense to me that an illustrator would literally draft in illustrations first. That is how the story is brought to life for you. It just makes so much sense to me. And I think, one thing that would be really neat once you're out there, once you're talking with kids, like there's no one right way to write a book. You can start with words or you can be like me and start with pictures. And I can just see a lot of kids everywhere instantly feeling like writing is now accessible to them because they could start with those pictures. So
Yes.
you need to share that everywhere.
Oh, you better believe it. I mean, when I'm doing my school visits coming up, the first thing that we're doing is going to be an exercise where I've got a little dragon at the top of a big blank space where the kids get to figure out what they want their horde to be, which is a writing exercise alongside an art exercise. It's kind of a creative writing exercise but in by way of a drawing exercise, which I've always felt like illustration is storytelling. Like when I worked on Disenchantment, the next Netflix show for years, we're always doing storytelling from within the backgrounds. Our department was painting the backgrounds, but we're doing so much legwork and telling the audience like what this world is and who the characters are. Like, for example, if you're painting a character's bedroom, it's more than just a bed and a window and a dresser. It's you're telling the audience what their personality is, what they do with their time, what their hobbies are. Like you can learn so much about the characters walking through the scene just by, what objects they put on their shelves and what they hang on their hooks by the door. Um, and every time I am working on a storytelling illustration, I am going through that writing process, in the back of my head. So then actually putting words to it at the end was just like this one extra layer, but it felt like gears that have already been turning for a long time. It was just like I needed this one more extra, more direct layer on top of that of narration.
Oh, I also love too, you pretty much gave any wannabe picture book writer a little mini master class in how to go do research with picture books. I'm going to go back and transcribe all of those questions that you just riffed off the top of your head and write them down for my own purposes, because that was just wonderful to hear. But listeners, you can't see the joy that was on Devin's face as she was talking about this research. I am clipping that and I'm saving that. I thank you for that. I just had to say that was a wonderful little piece in there.
Oh my gosh, of course. Yeah, I'm the kind of person who I can't do anything shallowly. Like when I become interested in something, I want to know everything about it. Like I want to know who are all the players and what is the game essentially for every single thing I do. And picture books have been just like that.
Now, when you were talking about your research, you mentioned a couple of things that I was hoping to ask you, not just as the author of the book, but as the illustrator. One of my favorite things, and I don't know why this gives me such joy, but it does. But when I can hold the picture book in my hand and I could admire the cover, but then I take that sleeve off and I see something different
Yes.
under the page on both the front and the back, I am just inexplicably happy when that happens. And I've got to say, underneath the sleeve of your book is the most adorable picture of Ember just stuffed to the gills with bread as he is flying back. I absolutely love it. I also love when you flip to the back, you see the other dragons who
Yes.
also are stuffed completely with loaves of bread. I just have to say thank you for doing that because you made me so happy when I lifted, I always peek like, is it the same? Is it different? And it's gorgeous.
Thank you. I love when the case cover, which is that's what the under the jacket cover is called on I think on all books, but at least on picture books, I know it is so fun to me when it's different. Like as soon as I have a new picture book in my hands, I love to peek and see if there's something different, especially because you can be a little bit more spoilery sometimes on that illustration and it is its own cover of the book. Like it's kind of like the b-side cover of the book. You get to do some more storytelling. It's such a cool location to give a little bit more depth about what the story is about and maybe tease at what happens in the story a little bit more than on that front cover. You can reveal a little bit more and you can also I love when it's something that is special for people who've already read the book too, because sometimes you want to dive into the book right away and you don't think about lifting the cover up until after you're done. So it's really fun when it's something that is like given a little bit more meaning after you've already finished the book and it's like a little extra surprise at the end.
Yes, I love it. And I don't know if it's because, when I was young, most of the books I read came from the library. Would go every week with my dad, would get more books than I could carry home, and I would read them. But when you get a picture book from the library, they are reinforced and
Yes,
they're covered in plastic, and you can't take that sheet off. So
it's
I don't
true.
even know how old I was until I realized, wait a minute, that can come off. There is a surprise under there, and ever since, I've just been fascinated with it. So I love that. I love that you did that. I also love the opening end pages.
Oh,
They're
yes.
magical golden pages where it's magical golden treasure and gold, and then it's magical golden bread at the
Yes.
end. And how do you literally get the gold to just shimmer on the page? I would love to pick your brain about your process for writing. How do you do that?
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, well, when it comes to just visually depicting gold, something that I think is really cool in illustration is that color is contextual. So if you have gold, but it's sitting in a bright orange background, it's not going to look like it shines that much. But you'll notice that throughout the book, what I often do is I put that gold up against a cool background. So blues, grays, purples. That's that contrast, that color contrast, because they're on opposite sides of the color wheel. That is actually what makes the gold shine that much more. So you'll notice when you open up the end pages that the flaps that sit on top of the end pages are blue. So that helps all of the gold of the end pages look extra shiny. And that is it seems like such a in the weeds thing to think about, but it helps so much with the impact of it just to have that reference point of, oh yeah, this is how cool colors can get. So wow, that is so warm and shiny and golden.
Oh, I'm just sitting here holding the flap and taking it off and putting it on and taking it off and putting it on. You're right. And I never would have caught that. So now I love that I've got another lens that I could dive into your book and other picture books with. And I'm so glad you mentioned the purple because I do have a couple of favorite pages in
Oh
here.
yeah.
uh, The pages with the purple background. And I should say what I think I love overall is that you change that background. So it could be more of a tan yellowish, then it switches to purple, and then we're in the bakery and it's more golden in the background. But then we're outside of the bakery and we have these, circle spotlight things with different backgrounds. The changes just help so much with the emotional changes and the progression of the book. But if I could only pick one that I love the most, it is the purple background where that gold from the bakery, first from up above,
Yep.
that Ember would see. I was like, "Oh, I wanna go there." You know how sometimes on Facebook or social media, they'll have a picture and they'll be like, "Wouldn't you want to be here?" I was like, I wanna just fly right down in there." So we first see it from the bird's eye view, and then when Ember just tucks his little wings inside of himself,
Yes.
falls asleep in front of the golden window, it's gorgeous. You feel the warmth. I almost can smell the bread, I swear. Those were my favorite pages because I felt like they were so immersive because of that glow that happened to come off the page.
Thank you. Yeah, my something that I've always loved to do as an illustrator is I want my illustrations not necessarily to look the way the world looks, but I want them to look the way the world feels. And I've always felt that way. I want to use color to show the world the way that it feels like when you're experiencing it. And something that I love about picture books, especially books, and this is true for often comics and graphic novels too, but when you have panels, anything with panels, the space behind the panels actually becomes such a big space for doing an extra level of storytelling, which is what you're talking about with the purple being behind the paneling there. Because that to me is kind of the background emotional state of what's happening in the story. That's the level that we're working off of. So it's like, in the beginning of the story, when they're kind of tannish, that's like a plain paper color. That's like, all right, here's the beginning of the story. This is, the jumping off point is neutral. But then when we start getting into the story, when we change the paper color behind the illustrations, we're changing kind of the underlying emotional state of the characters and of the story and using that as a vehicle for additional storytelling. So like when he runs into the bakery and he first goes and hides under a table, the background turns dark because he's in the shadows there. He's feeling a little claustrophobic and like, oh my gosh, he just ran into this bakery and he's in front of a person for the first time. And oh, they don't usually like dragons, but this one seems to be okay. So he creeps out and that background changes from dark colors to it turns into this warm golden color as he starts like kneading the bread, and that's his mood changing. And then by the time the sun comes out the next morning, we go back to these like bright warm yellows, and it's like his mood clears and the darkness is gone and he gets to fly back home to the Dragon Mountain.
This is why you think in pictures, because you just you again, I feel like I have another lesson now that I can take to every other picture book that I read. I felt it as a reader, but I didn't quite understand it until you just put that together of how that background that literally can shift the mood and the feeling behind all of it. And that's exactly what I felt. Exactly what I felt as I went through. I have to read it again now and pay much closer attention to your technique of how you because that's fascinating to me. I think it just helps bring the enjoyment of the book even more. And I can't really say what my other well, I can say the other page I love, but I'm not going to say what's on it because it happens to be the last page, and
Yeah,
I
yep.
I don't want to reveal it. I would say that maybe the spread that's maybe the third or fourth from the end is my favorite, which is this wonderful bakery scene
Yes.
that I won't say what's in it, but the last page, that double page spread, the emotion you feel, the change that has happened in
Yes.
the characters in the story. Oh, it's just perfect, Devin. It's
Oh, wow. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I know that people are going to love it. I know that kids are going to want to read it. I know adults are going to read it and then they're going to be like me and they're going to go back and then they're going to look a little bit more closer at the illustrations and get all of the tidbits and the nuggets that you shared in that process with us. And I'm really excited for your school visits because someone who has worked with a lot of kids, especially kids who had difficulty reading and writing, I feel like what you tell them could be a game changer for how they feel about themselves in that writing process.
I would love that. I actually like I would love so much if even one kid read this book and was like, I want to do that. Like to me that everything's worth it. And when I was coming up with what I wanted to use for my author photo for the book, I told my team I want it to be a picture of me as a kid because I want kids to be able to look and be like, "Oh, she was my age once." Like if I wanted to, I could keep drawing and I could keep coming up with stories and I could do this too. And that was so important to me. And I'm so happy that I was allowed to use a child photo of me for this because I was drawing dragons by the time I was that age. And I feel like that version of me who, is still deep inside my soul, like she is so thrilled that she got to make a book about a little dragon.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because I did love that. I love that. And when you started at the top of the episode talking about that love as a little girl, I thought, I know why that picture is there now. And it's got that swirl of magicalness around it that just
Yes.
makes it feel so wonderful. Oh, there's so many Easter eggs that people could find in your book. Those little unexpected things that are going to be fun for them to look at and figure out. Now, I know that this is just released, just a couple of months ago, at least based on when this episode
Yes.
will air. And so I know it is very new, but I do want to ask, what are you working on now? Are there any things that you could tell listeners that we might expect in the future?
Yeah, so I am working on another book and it may take place in this same universe. And I think that by December, an announcement will be coming pretty soon. So if you enjoy Ember's story, maybe keep an eye out because his story may not be over.
Oh, I love it. I love it. That makes me very happy to know about and to be able to share with readers and listeners. Where can listeners find you online so that they can keep track of you and when your next books are coming out? Any place you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I'm on most of the social medias, and if you search my name, it's Devin with an I, and then ELLE is my middle name, and Kurtz KURTZ. If you just search that on pretty much any platform, that is my name. I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it now,
Yeah.
even Tumblr, some of the older ones, YouTube. And I love using social media, so that is probably the best place to find me. And I have a website too, if you'd rather just go and see, the new projects when they come out.
Yeah. And I will link to all of those social handles, and I'm definitely linking to your website because I want them to do the cover scroll. Like
Oh yes,
I
yes,
just want
please
them
do.
to see all of those beautiful images that are there on your website. And if you're an educator listening, if you're a librarian listening, you need to bring Devin to your school because I think this book really could just your story behind it in the book could be a game changer for so many. So I'm just plugging that because you
Oh,
did.
thank you. Yeah, hey, get in touch. I'm so excited to start doing school visits. I've done one so far and it was like such a blast.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully, not hopefully, there will be lots more to come. I can envision that. And I'm excited to know that the books will continue and always an open invitation for whenever that one comes back out to come back and chat about the evolution of it here. I would love to keep chatting with you about it.
Oh my gosh, I would love to. And I mean, I'm illustrating like other books as well too. There's another book that I am just illustrating called Seven Ways Through the Woods that's coming out next year as well. Which even just as an illustrator, I feel like we do so much storytelling. So all those things that we talked about are in that book too.
Oh, wonderful. Well, again, like I said, I'll put all the links to that in the show notes. I will certainly put links to the Bakery Dragon in the show notes. And listeners, I hope you pick this one up. It is super special. And Devin, thank you for coming and letting me be part of your debut launch. This was such a fun conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun to get a chance to talk about this book. It's been the first time that I've gotten to really just talk about picture books as an art form. Ah, so good, so fun.
And well, thank you. And listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. And I will see you inside the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.